The anticipation for Fallout 4 has been one of the most excruciating in recent memory. After a myriad of false news and shattered hopes scattered throughout the course of many years, it's hard to believe that the seemingly eternal wait is finally over. I say with no exaggeration that Fallout 4 has a lot to live up to, and in many respects it succeeds, but it also falters in some key areas. If there is one thing that Bethesda Game Studios absolutely nailed with their latest entry is the world, which is not only large in volume and chock full of content, but also has no shortage of both macro and micro details. There is truly nothing quite like traversing Bethesda's vision of a post-apocalyptic Boston, which oozes style and substance around every corner, blending elements from our real-world Boston, like ravaged versions of the city's many real-life landmarks, with Fallout's own pseudo-history, culminating in one of the coolest, most lush, and most genuine video game worlds you will ever have the pleasure of traversing. It's abundantly clear that Bethesda spent an incredible amount of time researching Boston and fleshing out the game's pseudo-historical world. I only wish that they would have placed the same amount of attention and care to some of the technical aspects of the game. While the game's visuals are an absolute masterpiece on an artistic level, it lags behind when it comes to textures, polygons, models, and animation. While Fallout 4 is undoubtedly the best-looking Bethesda Game Studios game, and while the vastly improved lighting can make the game look stellar on occasions, it doesn't come close to being the best-looking current-gen game. Games like Witcher 3 and Metal Gear Solid 5: The Phantom Pain far surpass Fallout 4 in that aspect. This would be far more forgivable if Fallout 4 had the same level of polish as the former two games, but as is typical with Bethesda Game Studios game, that's simply not the case, featuring some of the same types of bugs, glitches, and oddities we have come to know from previous titles. Their insistence on taking their aging game engine's shaky foundation and building upon that for every installment, rather than creating something new tailored for current generation technology, is becoming more difficult to tolerate. Fortunately, Fallout 4 compensates for its technical mishaps by making great strides in areas of gameplay where previous games faltered. Gunplay, for example, is an absolute blast in Fallout 4. While you shouldn't expect the game's shooting mechanics to be as refined as those found in games tailored to be shooters like Call of Duty or Destiny, they are more than sufficient for what Fallout 4 is at its core, a role-playing game first. Unlike in Fallout 3, guns actually feel and sound impactful, with every shot giving off a sense of oomph that makes it incredibly satisfying to shower enemies with bullets or pull off gruesome headshots. Camera angles and aiming on both first and third-person perspectives have also been refined, and iron sight aiming works extremely well. Thanks to these solid core mechanics, playing Fallout 4 without VATS is actually entirely viable and fun, which should please more action-oriented players. But using VATS does have the advantage of giving you some breathing room to take a more strategic approach to combat and think about how to place your shots, which is crucial for more frail and tactical character builds. You won't have infinite breathing room like in past games, however, as VATS no longer freezes time but rather slows it down to a crawl. Percentages of hitting limbs will change live as enemies slowly move further away or closer to you, and it's entirely possible for enemies to get close enough to strike you while you're placing your shots. You will also often find yourself in situations in which enemies are making their way to cover in the middle of VATS, which means hesitating too much can yield missed opportunities. On the other hand, there will be times in which enemies are moving out of cover while in VATS, and this new system will allow you to wait a bit until enemies' limbs have a clear line of sight before pulling the trigger. All in all, this small but significant change to VATS is a welcome addition, as it makes VATS a far more dynamic and thrilling experience. The one problem I did encounter, however, is that I often found myself having some difficulty choosing the right body part with my mouse cursor. While this would be far more acceptable in Fallout 3, where VATS gives you all the time in the world, this issue is far less forgivable in Fallout 4, where VATS gives you a limited amount of time to place your shots. Not a deal breaker, but a noteworthy flaw. But overall, combat feels better than ever, and it helps that enemy AI has been improved drastically from past games. They'll take cover often, they'll try to flank you, and they'll generally put up a good fight, which in combination with the improved mechanics, pave the way for combat scenarios that are quite thrilling. Unfortunately, the same couldn't be said for companions, who are just plain dumb, and get in the way more often than they help. Maybe it's because I was playing a stealthy assassination style of gameplay, which requires coordination and precision, two words that are the complete opposite descriptions of Fallout 4's companion AI, but all I know is that most of the time I felt as though having companions was a liability, and that having them by my side made my life more difficult and frustrating, which shouldn't be the case. It's also never satisfying when they take your kills. Fortunately, companions are completely optional, so you can just send them home and be on your merry way as a lone wanderer. Alongside combat, another big change made to Fallout 4 is the leveling system. Fans of Fallout 3 will have to scrap everything they know about leveling, because it's been completely overhauled with a new perks chart system. Skills are now completely gone in favor of emphasizing the special attributes and perks. Each special attribute has up to 10 levels, and attached to each of those levels is a perk. If you do the math, 7 attributes times 10 levels yields 70 perks total. The higher your level for a specific attribute, the more base perks within the attribute's perk tree will be available to distribute perk points to, and the higher the level of the perk, the more exotic it'll be. So how you distribute points to your special attributes at the beginning of the game will have a huge impact on what perks you can invest in. Now, those who want to have access to higher level perks mid-game, Fallout 4 does allow you to level up special attributes by spending perk points on them. So even after exiting the vault, you'll have flexibility in how your character develops. In addition to all this, each of the 70 base perks have ranks for which players can spend additional perk points to further enhance their effects. A few of them only have 1 rank, but most of them have 2, 3, 4, even 5 ranks. You could almost say that these ranks are mini perks that reside within the base perks, so with every level you'll either be unlocking a base perk or adding ranks to a base perk you've already unlocked. I can't say that everyone will be fond of this system, especially Fallout veterans, but I personally really enjoyed it. Because each perk has a substantial effect on your character, you can truly feel significant progress with every level. That wasn't always the case in Fallout 3, where distributing points to a bunch of skills made the feeling of character progression more gradual and obscure, but in Fallout 4, progress made with each level feels more substantial. Now, Fallout 4's leveling system does come with the sacrifice of taking some control away from the player, as one can no longer fine-tune their character with careful skill points management, but at the end of the day, whether you enjoy this leveling system or not will be a matter of personal preference. Beyond leveling, a big part of character progression for any role-playing game is the loot system and the items and weapons that players find throughout the world. Fortunately, Fallout 4 has made great strides when it comes to the looting system. In this game, looting is as simple as looking at a corpse or container, which will bring up a small interface showing the stuff you can loot, scrolling through the contents with the mouse wheel, and then pressing E to take whatever is selected. And this all happens live without pausing the game, which adds a lot to immersion, as the flow of the game is no longer interrupted by constant pauses from bringing up the loot menu like in past games. It's pretty great and makes looting incredibly quick and snappy. And if you want to bring up the old loot menu that pauses the game, you can do so by pressing the transfer button, in my case R, on the keyboard. It also helps that Fallout 4 has a ridiculous amount of stuff to loot. There's the usual armor, weapons, ammunition, and bottle caps, of which there is plenty of. But you will also want to collect junk scattered throughout the world, as they are a vital part of the game's awesome crafting system. Almost every miscellaneous item you find in the world will be associated with base materials: rubber, plastic, glass, steel, copper, ceramic, circuitry, adhesive, screws, you name it. And everything you craft in this game, whether it be drugs or medicine from a chemistry station, or weapons and armor from workbenches, require a certain amount and combination of these base materials. What this means is that every piece of junk that you find throughout the wasteland is actually useful, especially if your character build favors crafting, and trust me when I say that you will want your character to be able to do at least some crafting. Weapons crafting in particular is really awesome in this game. You can take a base weapon and basically craft it any way you want once you have met resource and level requirements. You can take a short-range weapon and convert it into a deadly long-range weapon and vice versa. You can add modifications like extended magazines, scopes, and suppressors. You can modify receivers to take different types of ammo, and the list just goes on and on. It's just an incredible weapons crafting system that will allow you to make your weapon look and function in accordance to your playstyle, and it's just incredibly satisfying to be able to build your own custom weapon almost from scratch, especially when you can't find what you're looking for in the wasteland, which will be the case more often than not. Alongside being able to craft your own equipment, Fallout 4 introduces a brand new system that allows players to build, create, and manage settlements. It's a really neat optional feature that basically takes Skyrim's Hearthfire DLC to the next dimension, giving you an incredible amount of control over every aspect of managing an entire settlement. When rebuilding ravaged houses, you can construct every aspect of it, from its walls, windows, and doors to every piece of furniture. You can also place resource gathering devices like wells, plant crops for food, and even place security measures like turrets in case of foreign invaders. Everything you construct in settlements also require a certain quantity and combination of base materials by scrapping ravaged objects scattered throughout the settlement area that yield a lot of materials, so you'll have a good head start. And what's great is that the core construction mechanics are really intuitive, featuring an interface that allows players to easily pick out what they want to build, as well as controls that allow players to efficiently grab, move, and drop things. The settlement system is a whole game within itself, and while I don't think it'll be the highlight of your Fallout 4 experience, it'll certainly extend its lifespan by a significant amount. So we have a post-apocalyptic role-playing game with an incredible open world, enhanced gameplay, and overhauled systems, but none of it would matter if Fallout 4 didn't have a compelling story to drive players forward. But I can happily say that the game will have you hooked from the get-go. The story kicks off strong by giving players a glimpse of what pre-Great War life was like. It doesn't take long for the illusion of a vibrant and seemingly perfect world to fade, as the protagonist and his or her family are soon forced to make their way to Vault 111 in the wake of total nuclear annihilation. I do wish that this prologue portion would have been fleshed out a bit more, as the amount of time spent in this compelling era was all too brief, but it does a great job at giving players a point of reference for the devastation that the Great War caused, and it also adequately introduces the more personal kind of story that Fallout 4 intends to tell. It is also during this prologue portion that players will get to create their character through the overhauled character creation system, which gets rid of sliders altogether in favor of allowing players to mold faces with the press of a few buttons and by selecting and dragging the desired part of the face that they want to change. It's a little weird to handle at first, and I did sometimes find myself struggling to find the sweet spot to select a specific part of the face, but once you get the hang of it, you'll find that it's one of the most intuitive character creation systems ever made for a video game, so kudos to Bethesda for this. So anyway, after news broadcasts of impending nuclear war, you and your family barely managed to get to safety in Vault 111. Then, stuff that I don't want to spoil happens, and the player character wakes up from cryogenic sleep over 200 years after the Great War as the sole survivor of Vault 111. From there, your main goal becomes to find your infant son, who was snatched away by mysterious entities, and following this thread eventually leads to finding out about an elusive organization known as the Institute. The motivations in Fallout 4 feel very genuine thanks to the great setup provided by the prologue, and it's hard not to be intrigued by the mystery surrounding the Institute, an almost mythical entity whose existence is brought into question by the inhabitants of the Wasteland, with most believing it to be some kind of boogeyman that people blame when anything goes wrong. It all eventually culminates in some very unexpected twists, turns, and developments that will further keep players hooked. Overall, I actually really enjoyed Fallout 4's main campaign. Alongside the main questline, you will also encounter an overwhelming amount of side quests, all of which either have self-contained stories to tell or are part of a large chain of faction quests. This is where Fallout 4 truly shines. There is just a ridiculous amount of things to do in this game, and almost every quest you complete fleshes out the Fallout universe even further, and you, the player, gets to be a part of that. Now, making a game so open does come with sacrifices in the story's pacing. For example, you may often find yourself at a point of urgency halfway through a quest, only to find that you can stop midway at any time and spend hours upon hours doing other stuff before going back to the pressing task at hand. I'm not sure how Bethesda could have avoided this with the kind of games that they make, but it's noteworthy nonetheless. There are aspects of storytelling that have improved, however. Fallout 4 introduces a new conversation system that yields cinematic camera angles. While they do sometimes make way for weird visual glitches, for the most part it works fine and it makes conversations and scenes feel much more dynamic. It also helps that Fallout 4 features voiced protagonists, which I think were a necessity for the kind of story that Bethesda was trying to tell with Fallout 4. both Brian and Courtney do an awesome job at voicing the player characters, giving them a bit more substance, albeit at the sacrifice of full one-on-one immersion between the player and the protagonist. But again, I think it's a necessary evil for the kind of story that Fallout 4 tells. The ensemble also deserves a lot of commendation, as they all do a great job in bringing the large cast of characters to life, which helps to enrich and breathe life to the game world. Voice acting in Fallout 4 is overall excellent. What I do have a big problem with, however, is the new dialogue system. Anytime you're prompted to choose a dialogue option, you're presented with only 4 choices in a Mass Effect-style dialogue wheel, and the description for each choice is so vague that you rarely truly know what your protagonist is going to say or how he's going to say it. This is definitely a huge step down from previous Bethesda games, in which dialogue options were very clearly laid out. Furthermore, the removal of skills has had a significant negative impact on the dialogue system. In Fallout 3 and New Vegas, certain dialogue options would yield skill or perk checks that would increase the chances of persuasion or produce new dialogue options altogether. But in Fallout 4, persuasion is solely affected by how high your charisma attribute is. In this game, you will know when a dialogue option performs a charisma check when it's highlighted yellow, orange, or red, which represent easy, medium, and hard difficulty respectively. And again, because of how vague some of the dialogue option descriptions are, it's often hard to tell what your character will say or what effects persuasion will yield. It doesn't help that these charisma check moments are relatively sparse, and more often than not, persuasion serves little to no purpose in changing the outcome of a situation. On the topic of choice, I was very disheartened to find that the karma system has been completely removed from Fallout 4. While you can technically still choose to be good or evil by doing good or evil actions, it no longer feels as though the world reacts to them, making the actions you perform throughout your adventure feel far less significant and meaningful. And look, I know that Fallout 3's karma system wasn't perfect, but it was a great concept overall. An improved and more thoroughly thought out version of that system would have been more than welcome. Fallout 4 is equal parts brilliant as it is frustrating. With every 2 steps forward, the game seems to take 1 step back. But don't let that deter you from buying and playing this game. Everything from the lush, desolate, dense, and detailed world, the vast number of quests and their intriguing storylines, the improved gameplay mechanics, and the overhauled systems all contribute to make what is overall a phenomenal experience. This isn't the game of the year that I was hoping it to be, as the game is held back by diminished systems like dialogue and karma, lack of polish in key areas, and the usual technical flaws that are harder to forgive. But Fallout 4 is still an incredibly fun game that you'll very easily get lost in. I'm already a couple of dozens of hours into the game, and there are no signs of me slowing down or stopping. That's not even counting the fact that I'll probably be doing a second playthrough with a completely different character build. With that, I would like to end my review of Fallout 4. Thank you for tuning in. Share with us in the comments below what your experience with Fallout 4 has been like thus far. And to be further updated on future video game reviews, stay tuned right here on Young Yeah. I'll see you guys next time. Young out!